You're listening to Conversations with Chanda, a podcast that unpacks the community's grittiest, most vexing problems, hosted by Chanda Smith Baker. In this special episode, recorded during the Portraits of Us book celebration, we join Chanda Smith Baker in a dynamic conversation with influential leaders in philanthropy. Portraits of Us, a book of essays centering Black women leading philanthropy. Alongside Toya Nash Randall, LaCora Bradford Kesti, and Karen Kelley-Ariwoola, we delve into the vital intersections of racial equity, privilege, and community support. Discover how their voices are reshaping the landscape and driving change in the world of giving. Now let's tune in as our host, Chanda Smith Baker, engages in a dialogue with Toya Nash Randall, a distinguished figure in the world of philanthropy and the curator and catalyst of Voice, Vision, Value. With over 2 decades of executive leadership in philanthropy, Toya is a loyal advocate for Black women's vital role in achieving equity and justice in the sector.
So, Toya, here we are in Minneapolis.
Here we are.
Recording Conversations with Chanda, talking with you about voice, vision, value, Black women leading in philanthropy.
Yes.
Recording this on Prince's birthday.
Prince's birthday. The purple one.
The purple one. There's something really majestic about the day and the moment. I'm a week out from leaving my role at the Minneapolis Foundation. And I don't know about for you, but for me, this is a full circle moment because you have become my sister. Yeah. But I met you the year I got to the Minneapolis Foundation. But more specifically, when you heard that I was coming to the Minneapolis Foundation, you said, I've got you. I'm going to sponsor you in to come to the APFI Black Women in Philanthropy Retreat.
Yep.
In Palm Beach, Florida, because it's important for you to be grounded with women across the country that are doing hard work. And do you remember when I said, is it really hard though? Really, what's hard about philanthropy? I just came from running this organization. Right. Now that's hard work. And then I get down there and y'all are doing breathing exercises and yoga.
Yeah.
And I remember thinking the whole time, do you remember how wide-eyed I was?
Yeah. And is it Qigong we were doing on the open lawn by the ocean? Mm-hmm.
And I'm looking around like, what did I get myself into? Like why are they so stressed and why is this so needed? And what is it that I don't understand? So now I understand.
Now you understand.
Now I understand. And I imagine you overstand it. Because you've been in philanthropy for how long?
A long time. A couple decades now.
Was that 20 years?
Give or take.
And so what have you learned that you would want to share?
Yeah, I would say what I've learned is, and my grandmother used to say this, my grandma Lily, she used to say you were born with everything you need. It's in you, right? And I would add to that, it's in me and it's around me. And what's around me is a community of women who have shepherded me and helped shape me and support me in understanding how to navigate work that can be hard, but that everything doesn't have to be hard. This is a field where we have lots of privilege, access to, influence and an opportunity to make an impact in the midst of a lot of environments that can be harmful and individuals who don't always have our best interest at heart are the best interests of our communities. And so we are in these spaces, oftentimes pushing against those realities and feeling isolated and feeling as if all of it is up to us, right? And so 20 plus years later, understanding all of that to be the reality, I now understand that I have everything I need within myself and around me. Women like you, the legacy of Black women from this community. I met Retha Clark King when I was in philanthropy for my second year. And then met Wenda Weeks Moore probably around my fourth or fifth year. And then came into conversation and relationship with Karen Kelley-Ariwoola. And then Jackie Copeland Bouvier. And then you and Trista, right? And Tanya Allen. So when you talk about a full circle moment, us being here together, you know, there were women from this community who are giants. I didn't know they were giants at the time, but have come to appreciate and know the legacy and history of their contribution. And that's what I mean when I say I have what I need around me, and being able to tap in to that wisdom and that knowledge and those stories to inspire, to help keep me grounded, to help me understand that what I am navigating is not new. Those who came before me figured out a way, laid a roadmap. I need to tap into that. I need to understand that. And I need to understand what my role is in helping to move the needle for those in community with me and those coming up the line, right, with me and behind me.
You both talk about the work being a place of privilege, and there's a complexity of factors that work against who we are and what we bring to the table. Can you contextualize that? Which I think will, number one, affirm people that have the forces working against their brilliance, and then two, I think make it plain for folks that may not understand, because the roles do have levels of privilege to them.
Absolutely. So for me, I will just speak from my own experience. When I came into philanthropy, I worked for a small regional foundation that was at the very beginning of its formation. And I, having left a role as executive director of a nonprofit organization in my hometown of East St. Louis, came in the door as a grants manager to a small private foundation. And all I knew about philanthropy, going back to Minneapolis as a sort of place of connection for me, is there was a white man program officer named Dan. Oh God, what was Dan's last name? He was a program officer at the McKnight Foundation. And Dan would come to East St. Louis because we were doing some work around water conservation and preservation around the Mississippi River. And Dan would come to East St. Louis with his briefcase and his BlackBerry and ask all kinds of probing questions and get folks all hot and bothered, you know, around his presence and what the possibility of his presence might mean, good or bad. And that was my connection to philanthropy. Dan Ray was his name. So I then fast forward to coming to philanthropy as a program officer, but it's a new foundation. So I'm at the table with the executive director. It's her first time being an ED, and a board of directors representing one of the wealthiest families in Illinois. And I had no clue of what I was in the midst of, right? But I was at the table in the ideation phase with them, in the sort of dreaming space with them about what this philanthropic organization could be, right? And spent 13 years learning about philanthropy at the table with those leaders and those high wealth individuals who made space for me. And at times it was very difficult, as I was the longest tenured African American on staff at that foundation. and went from a grants manager to a program director, and was being primed to be the successor to the founding executive director. But about 13 years in, I realized there's something else for me to do, and it's not here. I've done what I've come to do. And so I had access and privilege in being in relationship with these folks. I learned a lot, but as the only African-American staff person in the beginning and the longest African-American staff person over the tenure of my 13 years, I experienced a lot of sort of moments where my ideas were questioned, where the efficacy of my leadership was challenged. There were moments when there were experiences I wanted to have for my own development, and some of the feedback was, well, you've got to make a case for how this will benefit the foundation. And so there were times when my development, my ideas, my leadership, my contribution was not valued, and it was said to me very explicitly, right? And it was during that time that I began to seek out community. The Association of Black Foundation Executives, APFE, was a space that provided soft landing and comfort and nurturing for me, and sort of helped me recharge and recalibrate to go back into the work, because I believed in the work and I believed in the community of people I was working in support of. And so it's sort of existing in that, and the duality of the privilege and the access and the complexity of how our contributions are undervalued or dismissed, and then having space and place to go to, as I said, get recharged, get recalibrated, get reaffirmed.
One of the themes that I've picked up on, and as my network has grown across the country of women in philanthropy, that it has been that our expertise is often more recognized in our work in community than our contributions inside of the foundations. That there's sort of this duality that like you are very good at was sort of speaking to communities that you are familiar with, but we got you in here, your value was out there, not in here. And so I don't know if that's a theme that you have heard, but I know I certainly have heard that in different ways. And women are seeking ways to figure out how to navigate that.
Yeah, and I don't disagree. And, I would say that is one of the many reasons why I created Voice, Vision, Value. Because there really is no space in philanthropy that sort of has a sustained narrative and sort of recognition of our contribution, right? As a community of leaders, the largest BIPOC community of leaders in the field. When I say that to folks, they're like, really? Is that true? I'm like, yeah, that's true. And we have this Trailblazer Tuesday social media campaign where we give shouts out to Black women who have made history in various sort of ways over the course of their careers, where we honor those who have transitioned and are now with the ancestors. And it's often surprising to folks to read about our contributions. It's often surprising to folks to know this history and some of these facts, right? When I talk about, Skillman Foundation for the past 22 years have had consecutive Black women leaders. And that is the only organization in the field that has had that to be its practice, right?
Wow.
But it's not documented. It's not talked about. I think there's a lot we can learn from those institutional leaders, those board members who've been trustees over the past few decades, who've contributed to the nurturing and support of folks like Carol Goss and Tanya Allen, and now Angelique Power. But so yeah, there is the value that we hold and we are celebrated for in our community, but the field does not sort of hold space for us in that same way. And I'm hoping that Voice, Vision, Value can begin to sort of push back against that, if not so much for the field, but for us to see one another and understand that so much of what the stories we've told ourselves and the stories that others have told us about ourselves, they're just not true. The idea for Voice, Vision, Value came during the pandemic after a book I was developing was put on hold because, you're right, the world had to sort of focus on other things. And a lot of time and energy had been spent in the fall of 2019 interviewing women, researching, the literature and publications about Black women's leadership, not just in philanthropy, but writ large, to understand what a project like this could contribute. And so I believe we had conducted between 75 to 80 plus interviews in the fall. We'd had a concept, we'd had some verbal commitments to finance the project, and then everything was put on hold around February, March of 2020. And I had many Black women advising me over the course of the research and development phase, one of them being a sister, Tajma Beverly. She was the inaugural Deborah Holmes Fellow at the Women's Funding Network. And Tajma said to me, the book project may need to be put on hold, but you can't just stop. You've got to do something with everything you've heard, with everything you now know to be true. You've got to figure out what to do in the meantime to hold space for the energy and enthusiasm and the expectation that has been created. And so the Spears Group, who are the talented and brilliant creative force behind Voice, Vision, Value, they were the folks who had helped with the research and development. And so we sort of got to talking about what could we do in the meantime, and what could we do that would be digital, right? Because we couldn't leave the house. So everything we were thinking through had to sort of live in this virtual space. And so Voice, Vision, Value was born from those conversations at Tajma's urging, and sort of as we sort of downloaded the themes and the key messages from all of those interviews, those words, voice, vision, value, just sort of resonated with me. And so that's how VVV came to be. And so we launched a website, and we started hosting the web series where we began talking to Black women via Zoom about their leadership experience and contribution and demonstration. And then, the next crisis happened, which was the racial uprising. And I was hearing from Black women how the field of philanthropy was turning to them, their CEOs, their boards of trustees, their colleagues and peers and community, asking what should philanthropy do in this moment. So you've got this global pandemic that's disproportionately impacting Black and brown communities and exacerbating already existing, health disparities. And then you have on top of that, or adjacent to that, or parallel to that, the racial uprising with the murder of Breonna Taylor and then George Floyd, and the sort of what that rose up in everybody, the sort of sleeping and weeping silent grief and trauma that Black folk had been living with, and the world was paying attention in a different kind of way. And so we were sort of rising up while also having to hold space for the trauma and the sadness and the unknown factors of what tomorrow might bring as folks were dying in record numbers from the pandemic. So the idea came to document how Black women were leading the field in that moment, COVID and the racial uprising. And then, that led into the election and the sort of political uncertainty that came with that. And then the insurrection in 2021. And so we partnered with Frontline Solutions and Dr. Jessica Barron as the lead researcher to just talk to a community of Black women leaders to just put pen to paper. How are you leading the field? What are the strategies? Where have these strategies been born from? And what is your vision for the field going forward? And so the Centering Ourselves research report series was born. In 2020, we released the first report in 2021, committed to producing 3 reports, one every other year. So we're in the process of developing the second report, which will actually chronicle the history of Black women's leadership at Skillman Foundation. I referenced earlier, they've had 3 Black women CEOs in the past 20 plus years. So we're gonna sort of talk with those leaders, Tanya and Carol and Angelique, as well as board members, present and past, to understand what does it take to support Black women's leadership? What commitments did the board make? Was it intentional or was it a more organic process? And what are those lessons the field can learn? Because we have plenty of examples of institutions that hire consecutive white leaders, but not many who hire consecutive Black or people of color leaders. So that's the second report. And then the book project was brought back online in 2022 when the world sort of opened up and things were safer for us to interact and engage. And we had lived through various iterations of COVID and Omicron and all of those things. And we launched it here in Minneapolis and in New Orleans in May of 2022. So to be back here in June to celebrate, reveal the book cover, sneak peek with the Twin Cities chapter, to celebrate Chanda. I would say it evolves and continues to evolve very organically. Listening to women's questions and curiosities and requests for support is really that's what guides the work. And women saying yes. None of this could be possible if women don't say yes.
Continuing the conversation, Chanda turns her attention to another remarkable guest, LaCora Bradford Kesti. LaCora is a Minneapolis native with over 2 decades of experience living, volunteering, working, and is deeply connected to the Twin Cities. She's a dedicated Northside community member, serving on boards and fostering collective impact.
On a scale of 1 to 10, how dope are you?
Oh, I'm mad dope. 10. I'm off the scale.
There's no scale that can hold you.
There's no scale that can hold me. I'm dope.
Why do you call me Big Boss?
I call you Big Boss? Oh, that's a good question. Well, because you're amazing. And why do I call you Big Boss? I mean, because that's how I first met you, was the Big Boss. I met you as the Big Boss, and I call you Big Boss because I feel like that's your personality. Like, you lead with integrity. You lead as, like, you're not afraid to speak your mind, say what you have to say, and call out what needs to be said, especially in places that aren't really advocating for Black and brown people. So you're the Big Boss.
I'm the Big Boss. So when I was at Pillsbury United Communities and I was the CEO, and nobody else would come in my office when I was working because I was working.
Yes. And?
You would just come in and plop down.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Why did you feel like you had permission to do that?
Because you said your door is always open. And I believed you.
And did I ever turn you down when you did that?
No. You said, do you want to sit here? And then I said, yeah. And then I was like, I don't know if I really want to sit here in this spot. So I think I sat in that nice chair that you had that had the little footstool.
Mm-hmm. The one that Kamaria slept on.
Yep.
So when, I'm thinking a lot about like the way in which I support leaders
Yeah.
and the ways leaders need to be supported. Is there an intersection? Like, if you had to give me advice, what would it be?
If I would have to give you advice, I think the first thing that comes to mind is continue to bring folks along. I think throughout your journey of your career, you've always brought people along with you. You know, invitation to an event, you know, sending a link to apply to something, you know, village auntie, here's $10 at the basketball game. Like, I don't know, like you've always been a person to see talent and or to open a door for someone. And so don't stop doing that, because I think wherever you go, like there's space for everyone, and you do that.
So how long have you been in formal philanthropy?
3 years.
And
1
what's your
year with
title?
the feds. 1 year with the feds and 2 years with the Women's Foundation. The Vice President of Community Impact.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear that first part.
Vice President of Community Impact. It's still new. I'm still getting used to it.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
What has shocked you?
About philanthropy, how we are all still so siloed, and we're not really all working together to really do some really great work. That still has shocked me.
What do you love about it?
The way that we are able to interact with community and touch community in a different way. I would say, at least for my organization, like I feel like my proximity to community, I still get to be close to them, even though I'm still a funder.
What do you hope your legacy in that role will be?
That I created more opportunities for more people to get funding. Like I let go of some of those barriers or the traditional ways of how we had to do funding and evaluation.
You know, we are here talking with Toya Randall and her amazing vision on Voice, Vision, Value, Black women leading in philanthropy, which you are part of that community. This is really a storytelling. It's documenting the stories and like there's urban legend, right? There's like this oral history that is very rich in tradition, but we are working to document. Do you think we are fully telling our stories? Like, what do you hope that we do to better tell our story?
I think one thing, so I had the opportunity to sit down with Wenda Weeks, and she said to me, you know, she was like, philanthropy, like we have to demystify what all of this really means. And it can feel like an industry that's so, like no one really knows the ins and outs of what it is. And I feel like telling our story of like how we've had to navigate the systems that have been already in place and how we're trying to envision something new and different and what that co-struggle looks like. I feel like that's some of the things that I want to be able to speak to, or I think even like we were working with trying to figure out a DAF holder. Are we going to really like take over what their grant making looks like? And I'm like, are they equipped to do something like that? Are they ready to, you know, go out and train and do this work? And I feel like people think it's just like so easy to cut and paste and to give funds, but it's really intentional in how we hold it and the pieces that we have to navigate, because it's hard. Giving out money is hard. There's always somebody that's going to say you did it wrong. And to talk about what that looks like, you know, talk about what is all of that? What is the struggles that we go through, the co-struggles?
How do you know when you've made a difference?
When a grantee calls me and says, hey, thank you, and I need this, and I can offer support, but that they're comfortable to be able to come to me in times of need and also feel celebrated in good times as well.
Any parting words of inspiration?
Keep being a big boss. Don't stop.
Don't stop.
Don't stop.
Are you creating space for others to come along with you?
Hell yeah.
Are you playing it forward?
I am. I sure the hell am.
All right. Thank you.
Our journey through this insightful discussion brings us to Karen Kelley-Ariwoola, a prominent voice in philanthropy. Join Chanda and Karen as they discussed governance, accountability, and the role of foundations in fostering equity. Karen is currently the Chief Operating Officer at NAS, Northside Achievement Zone, a distinguished senior executive known for her exceptional achievements and commitment to equity.
Oh, Karen Kelley-Ariwoola.
Yes. Where do we begin?
I tell you this story every time I see you, and then I'm going to repeat it again because I grew up and I did not know, I was not raised in a house where we said words like philanthropy. But I was raised in a house where we did giving, right? We supported our church, we supported each other, we supported community. My mother was always at my school, right? My uncle led the school's, system. Like, we were a very engaged family broadly and still are in community. But we did not talk about it in these very tangible terms because it was who we were. It wasn't what we did, it was who we were. And so I went to church and we were church mates. And I would see you at church, and I still sit in the back and you sit in the front with your family.
My husband makes me sit in the front.
Okay. And I sit in the back, and I just started coming into wanting to make more and more of a difference in the community. And, when I first started observing you, I don't even know if I knew what your title was, but I knew you were a difference maker in community, and I knew that difference made a difference for me. And it has been such a footprint for me. And there are moments that you will never know that I've observed that have influenced me personally and professionally that I don't even know if I could say thank you enough. So thank you. You are a trailblazer. You broke ceilings in philanthropy. Did you know that you were doing that when you were doing it?
Wow. Well, thank you for the kind words. And, it's interesting because I would describe my family in a very similar way. My mother was a social worker. She served on our local school board. One of her favorite sayings was charity begins at home. So, how you act in this house is how you need to act when you go in the community. And we were always doing something that was about somebody else. I joined philanthropy quite by accident. I moved from Chicago to Minneapolis, saw the job posted at the Minneapolis Foundation. And because I had been working with children and families in poverty, so to speak, in Chicago, that was how the job was framed. And so I was thrilled to be hired, but I had never worked in philanthropy. I, helped write grants and ask for money. And so actually, in a sense, from the very first day that I started, I knew that I was walking on a path that might be different. There were two people hired at the same time. An African-American man had left the foundation, and people in the community were saying, "Oh, so you took his job." And I just remember having this feeling like, oh, so there's only one seat for a Black person. I was determined in my own mind, not knowing how what ended up being almost 20 years would unfold, to look for every opportunity to change that narrative.
Part of the project that I've been very honored to be part of, Black Women Leading in Philanthropy, Voice, Vision, Value, under Toya Randall's vision, has been really documenting and telling our stories. And as I've thought about it more, of course, you and Wenda and Retha and others, right, come to mind. And as I've thought about that, there was also this recognition that we actually have less Black women leading in philanthropy than we did 10, 15 years ago. So what does that feel like? Like you were busting through ceilings and yet we have less people at the top, in the top spots.
Yeah. I've thought about that a lot. And to be honest, it's hurtful on a really deep level. It's almost in the same way that our parents fought so hard to, open so many doors, change systems. I think of all the marches I went to as a child, the protests, and I often say my parents and grandparents, particularly my grandparents, would be so disappointed if they knew that we're still in the situation we're in this country after all that they, put on the table. And, when I came to Philanthropy, my very first phone call was from one of my mentors, Charlene Edwards, who was at the Bush Foundation. And she called me out of the blue and said, welcome, and you're one of us. And it was Charlene Edwards. There were about 5 or 6 Black women at the Bush Foundation, General Mills, Northwest Area Foundation, McKnight. We got together every single month for dinner. We celebrated each other. We cried together at times. And, there's times when I just sit back and look today and I think, we took several steps forward and it feels like we've taken several steps back. I ask myself, what is that about? And sometimes I feel like kind of the saying, been there, done that, is relevant. It looks good when you are a foundation, especially in the midst of all that's happened in our country and our community, to say, yeah, I hired a Black person in philanthropy. But the question of, do you really want us bringing our whole selves with all of our ideas, with bringing the community along, challenging the status quo? When I think about some of the conversations I sat through, some of the situations I endured, 2 times in particular that I literally thought I was going to get fired because I had to be who I was in the moment. And, I look back and I think, we did all of that. I mean, at the same time, there are women that I see. I mean, I remember when I saw the announcement of your joining Philanthropy, I just didn't have any words for how excited, proud that I was. And I see young women that are in some spots that I just pray that they have the opportunity to, grow and move up. And so it's a very much a mixed bag for me. But I honestly expected so much more.
What do you think needs to happen to create space for more of us to move up or to be brought into those lead roles? Do you think it's governance? Do you think we need to take better care of ourselves? Like, is it fatigue and we move out? Is it impatience? Like
anything, it's multidimensional. Governance is certainly a significant factor. It's like we need more of us on boards. When people ask me, do you ever want to get back in philanthropy? I always say I want to be on a foundation board, because it's that vote, it's that search committee, it's that who's going to be there for the long haul when new ideas are proposed, when different organizations are put on the table for funding. You need allies. And so, I like to think that some of the work that some foundations are doing around, becoming more culturally competent, all of that is good. But at the end of the day, it really comes down to leadership. And I think it's also, I mean, I love the collective that you've been a part of starting. And, that's another way to create our own. But, I've always been a big believer that, I mean, where the money is, especially in community foundations, the first word is community. The whole structure of those foundations is really supposed to be about serving the needs of the whole community. And we have to be in a position to make that happen, because so often if we're not there, it's not going to happen. Or at least the conversation is never going to be entertained. So it's just so many elements that go into it.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I've been in a lot of conversations where, and especially in community, when they're like, no one's holding philanthropy accountable to what it says. Who holds philanthropy accountable? I mean, really, the buck does stop at the governance level, really.
Yeah. I mean, and of course, people in community, well, not everybody, let's say, feel like it's risky, because you're trying to get money from a foundation. And so you don't want to be too critical. But I actually love the people that picked up the phone, that took me to task, that, mostly, in the line at Cub or, being out in community Sunday morning, I didn't get this money, or what's going on?
What's it going to take? Y'all got a problem with my organization?
Right,
I just had one of
right.
those calls this week.
Yeah, one of my funniest things that happened, this is when my kids were little, I was driving and somebody, caught my eye, rolled down the window, and they're yelling, I need $10,000 for whatever this thing was. And my son was sitting in the back seat, and I could just see his eyes were like huge. Like he's thinking, Mom has all this money. So I had explained to him, okay, this is how it works. This is, Mommy does not have $10,000. But yeah, I think in general, philanthropy is not accountable. Not in the way that you or I might define it, not in the way that community would define it. There's still a lot of work to be done there.
For the project that Toya is doing, I find it to be really exciting because of simply everyone doesn't have maybe a Karen Kelley sitting in the front aisles, of their church, or they may not have someone within reach that has the role. If you can't see it, you can't believe it. And I think the more we document our stories, the more we see the possibility in ourselves. Is there anything that you want to share about how you might be resonating with what Toya is doing?
I've always been a believer that stories are powerful. I've been in a lot of conversations lately just about narratives, the narratives that we believe ourselves as Black women, what we believe about ourselves, and as a group, how we can come together to change those narratives. The Black women I know in philanthropy are some of the most amazing women that I know doing anything, anywhere. And to lift up those stories, lessons learned, and also speak about the challenges, as hard as it is, because I think any of us could tell stories that would shock. That the average, you talk about governance, board member, donor, just people in the community. So I think it's just so important to tell the story and to document it for, history books. Because I have to believe that everything, all of the seeds that have been planted will bloom. And there are, younger women coming behind us that we don't know are watching us, who will be inspired to take that next step. And so I am just thrilled to see the work and, really grateful to Toya and others for the vision. No pun intended, because it matters.
Yeah. Even for this event, right? Like trying to curate a list of Black women in philanthropy. And I'm like, okay, we can have the event. I think I got to 30. Then I'm like, okay, well, I can do women of color in the event. I get to a little bit more. I go, well, women who support women of color and Black women in philanthropy. You get to a little bit more, right? Like, it's like, there's becoming more of a critical mass. And there's more than what there were, but those top roles. And it's one of those things where you can both be excited. I don't know. I just keep talking about joy and pain. And I was at this, I actually moderated something earlier today for Echoing and Green. As part of their opening, they talked about what is power. And one of the fellows got up and they said, when people think about power and how we talk about privilege, is that there's people born every day with all the resources they need. All the financial resources they need. They can get up, they can do whatever they want. And then there's people that have no resources that are doing amazing things for other people. How we define power and privilege needs to be rethought and recalibrated and owned differently by us. And we need the resources to go with the people that are willing to do more for others. And we have to think about how we use philanthropy and our financial structures to power difference making. And as he was saying it, I could just feel myself sort of tearing up, right? Because you're working in these complexities and things that shake your own sensibilities. And you're working in the middle of some of the most brilliant things you'll ever see that you don't have enough money to support. And you can see the lights light up and you can feel the frustrations. There's a level of complexity to philanthropy that from outside you would never know. And I think that's been the biggest lesson for me. Because, I remember my husband, when he first came in, I was like, oh my God, babe, I'm so tired. And I remember us driving. I don't remember, we were on a road trip. And he's like, really, Chanda, you're giving away money. There's nothing hard about that. I think I didn't talk to him the rest of the 4 hours. I'm like, I was trying to think about what I was going to say that wasn't mean. Because I'm like, really? And I couldn't even find the words. But it really is it's a very complicated sector. And I expect more from it. And I'm looking forward to continuing to push for more.
Yeah. And you should. It's funny. I felt like after I had been at the foundation for 18 years and had a going away celebration, I kind of joke with my husband, like, now do you understand what I do? Because it is so complex, and it isn't. It can appear easy, but it isn't. And nor should it should be more simple in the sense of access from the community and the community being able to understand processes and systems for like, how do we get the resources to do what we need to do without jumping through 10 million hoops? On the other hand, there is a level of, I think, more complex understanding about what's really happening in the community, and not thinking that all of the solutions are just that simple. And particularly not wanting to invest in the long term for things that, took us 400 plus years to get here.
If I wasn't having such a good day, I'd talk to you about impact and evaluation. Because that one right there, I'll tell you what, to that point, right, is that people want investment and they want change in 6 months. And it's so much more nuanced. And maybe I will talk about it because I've said that on the financial side, you would understand it. You understand market variability, right? You understand when inflation, and you understand the financial market. And so you expect the returns not to be the same. But on the community side, it's almost like the more variability, the more disruption, the quicker you want. the ROI. And it actually just doesn't work that way because trust has been interrupted.
Right.
And so you've got to come back in and you have to have some patience, right? You have to rebuild, you have to send, you have to sit in it. And it actually takes, there's not that much difference. There at least there's comparatives that can be drawn from it. And so over here we understand, just be patient. Right? There's bear and bull markets.
Right.
And if you just wait over time, it will turn out. But on the community side, we don't get it.
Right. Right.
And we need to learn how to understand that differently.
Yeah, I mean, that's the world I live in every day now.
Yeah.
Being on the ground, working in North Minneapolis, with a very big mission to end generational poverty and create a culture of achievement. There's so many places where someone might say, we're not winning. Where's the impact? We put all this money in, and yet without the acknowledgement of everything that you said, but also the broken systems, the context in which we operate. I mean, how are our kids supposed to learn when, they have to walk past memorials of community members that have died in gun violence, right. And that's at their bus stop, just all of the factors. And I often have these conversations with board members and donors. These are not excuses.
No, these are realities.
This is the reality and the context in which we have to work to create change. Yeah. And, I've lived in the community for 28 years. I raised 2 children there, my husband and I. We work, worship, play, everything in the community. It means everything to me to create the change. But it isn't going to happen overnight. And true leadership, understands that. And I think that's what's missing.
That's a mic drop right there. Thank you, Karen.
Thank you. Thank you. I look forward to seeing where you're off to next. We'll always be your cheerleader.
Thank you.
To explore more insightful conversations and stay updated on Chanda Smith Baker's work, visit our new website at smithbaker.co. That's smithbaker.co.